There is a number that should haunt every American household, and yet almost no one speaks it out loud. $12,468. That is what the average family of four now spends on groceries each year in this country. $12,000 handed over, receipt by crumpled receipt, to a system that grows food in dead soil, ships it across 3,000 miles of diesel-fueled highway, and wraps it in plastic that will outlast your grandchildren. And every single January, as the seed catalogs arrive in the mailbox and the ground outside sits frozen and gray, millions of well-intentioned people flip through those glossy pages, dream about summer tomatoes, and then do absolutely nothing until May. They wait. They wait because someone, somewhere, taught them that gardening is a summer hobby. That nothing can go into the ground until the last frost has passed, until the soil is warm, until the danger is over. And so they wait. And while they wait, they swipe their debit cards at the supermarket. Week after week, month after month. Lettuce from Arizona, garlic from China, potatoes from Idaho, wrapped in mesh bags that cost more per pound than they did a decade ago, shipped from farms that would rather spray a field with glyphosate than let a single weed compete with their crop. Here's the truth that the waiting has cost you. There is a vegetable, one single, ancient, almost absurdly prolific plant, that not only tolerates the cold of late winter, but actually demands it. It does not merely survive a frost. It needs the frost. It converts the bite of freezing temperatures into sugar, and into flavor so deep and complex that anything you have ever purchased from a grocery store shelf is, by comparison, a pale, flavorless imposter. This plant can be sown directly into the half-frozen earth of February. It will germinate in soil temperatures as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit, temperatures at which most modern hybrid seeds would simply rot and die. It will push through snow. It will feed your family through March, April, May, and June. And if you manage it correctly, using techniques that your great-great-grandmother understood instinctively, but that modern agriculture has buried under a mountain of synthetic fertilizer, it will continue producing food well into the crushing heat of summer, long after conventional wisdom says it should have bolted and gone bitter. The plant is the potato, not the commercial russet Burbank. Why, bred for nothing but uniformity and deep fryer compatibility. Not the smooth, waxy, genetically narrowed specimens stacked in fluorescent-lit supermarket bins, their skins still faintly damp with the chlorinated wash water used to make them appear clean. No, we are talking about the real potato, the landrace potato, the cold-hardy, disease-resistant, nutrient-dense cultivars that once fed entire civilizations through the darkest winters in human history, and that now exist only in the hands of a few stubborn seed savers, small farms that refuse to register with the system, and indigenous communities in the high Andes who have been growing them in frozen ground for over 8,000 years. If you do not get these into the earth by March the 1st, you will have missed the single most important window in the food-growing calendar. And you will spend the rest of the year paying for that mistake, one grocery receipt at a time. To understand why this window matters and why it has been deliberately obscured from modern consciousness, you have to travel backward, not just a few decades, centuries. In the year 1748, in the small mountain village of Parmentier, in the Vosges region of eastern France, a boy was born who would one day be imprisoned for the crime of eating a potato. His name was Antoine-Augustin Parmentier. He was captured by Prussian forces during the 7 Years' War and held as a prisoner of war for 3 years. During that captivity, his diet consisted almost entirely of potatoes, a food that the French government had officially banned for human consumption in 1748, declaring it a cause of leprosy. The Parliament of Paris had made it illegal. The Faculty of Medicine at the University of Paris had condemned it. The entire French establishment, the aristocrats, the clergy, the academic elite, had looked at this tuber, this quiet, dirt-covered, unremarkable root that asked for almost nothing and produced almost everything, and they had decided it was dangerous. Not because it was dangerous, because it was free, because it grew in poor soil, because it did not require a mill, a baker, a supply chain, or a tax collector. Because a single peasant family with a small plot of rocky, marginal land that no landlord cared about could grow enough potatoes in a single season to feed themselves for an entire year without buying a single loaf of bread. And bread in 18th century France was not just food, it was control. The price of bread was the lever by which the monarchy regulated the mood of the populace. If potatoes replaced bread, the lever broke, the control vanished. Parmentier survived his imprisonment. He returned to France not weakened but healthier than he had been before his capture. He had gained weight on potatoes. His scurvy had healed. His teeth were intact. He had watched Prussian peasants grow the tuber in conditions that would have killed wheat, barley, and rye. He had seen them plant in late winter, pushing seed potatoes into ground that was still streaked with frost, and he had watched those plants emerge weeks later, green and vigorous, while the fields around them lay dormant and bare. He spent the rest of his life in a war against his own government, campaigning to legalize the potato. He threw lavish dinners for the aristocracy, serving nothing but potato dishes. He gave Marie Antoinette a bouquet of potato flowers, which she reportedly wore in her hair. He convinced King Louis XVI to plant a field of potatoes and then, in a stroke of manipulative genius, posted armed guards around the field during the day, only to remove them at night. Knowing that the sight of guarded crops would convince the local peasants that the potatoes must be valuable enough to steal, they did steal them. They planted them. And within a generation, the potato had broken the bread monopoly across France. But the story does not end there. It rarely does when power is involved. What happened to the potato over the next 200 years is one of the most instructive parables in the history of food. The plant that had been banned because it was too free, too easy, too independent, was slowly, methodically captured by the very system it had once threatened. By the mid-19th century, industrial agriculture had begun the process of narrowing. The thousands of potato varieties that existed across Europe and the Americas, varieties adapted to every conceivable climate, soil type, and altitude, were systematically replaced by a handful of high-yielding commercial cultivars: the Irish lumper, the russet Burbank, the Kennebec. These were potatoes bred not for resilience but for uniformity, not for nutrition but for shelf life, not for the small farmer but for the large-scale operation that could afford the chemical inputs required to keep a genetically identical monoculture alive. And then came the blight, Phytophthora infestans. The Great Hunger. 1 million dead. Another million fled. An entire nation brought to its knees not by the potato itself, but by the catastrophic arrogance of planting a single variety across an entire island and then being shocked when a single pathogen wiped it all out in a season. The lesson should have been seared into humanity's collective memory. Diversity is survival. Monoculture is a death wish. But the lesson was not learned. It was buried. Because there was money to be made in uniformity, and none to be made in teaching a family how to grow 20 different potato varieties in their own backyard without buying a single product from a corporation. Now let us talk about why this plant does what no other common garden vegetable can do in late winter, and why the science behind cold weather potato planting is not folk wisdom or superstition, but verifiable, repeatable biochemistry that modern agronomy departments have known about for decades and simply chosen not to teach. When a potato tuber is placed in soil at temperatures between 38 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit, something extraordinary begins to happen at the cellular level. The tuber is not a seed. It is a living organ, a modified stem, packed with starch granules stored in amyloplasts within its parenchyma cells. Under cold stress, an enzyme called invertase activates and begins cleaving the sucrose molecules within the tuber into glucose and fructose. This process is called cold-induced sweetening, and it serves a precise biological purpose. The simple sugars lower the freezing point of the intracellular fluid, functioning as a natural antifreeze. The potato is literally converting its own stored energy into cryoprotectant. This is the same fundamental chemistry that allows certain species of Arctic frogs to freeze solid and survive, the same principle that keeps the sap of sugar maples liquid at temperatures well below the freezing point of pure water. But the magic does not stop at mere survival. As the tuber sits in cold soil, its eyes, which are axillary buds arranged in a spiral phyllotatic pattern along the surface, begin to swell. Root initials, which are clusters of meristematic cells at the base of each eye, start dividing. They are slow, painfully slow, by the standards of modern impatience, but they are relentless. Each root initial sends out a primary root that immediately begins forming root hairs, microscopic extensions of single epidermal cells that increase the absorptive surface area by a factor of several hundred. These root hairs do not just absorb water, they exude organic acids, citric acid, malic acid, oxalic acid into the surrounding soil, dissolving mineral particles and making phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and trace elements bioavailable in ways that no synthetic fertilizer can replicate. The plant is mining the earth. It is performing chemical extraction at the molecular level, and it is doing it in February, while your neighbors' gardens sit empty and their wallets sit open. Simultaneously, the cold soil activates fungal networks that lie dormant through the heat of summer. The arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, by ancient organisms that have existed in symbiosis with plant roots for over 450 million years, form hyphae that extend outward from the potato roots like a second nervous system. These hyphae are impossibly thin, just 2 to 10 micrometers in diameter, thinner than a human hair by a factor of 20, yet they extend the effective root zone of a single potato plant by up to 700 times. They transport phosphorus back to the plant in exchange for carbon sugars. They transport water. They transmit chemical warning signals from plant to plant when pathogens are detected. They are, in every measurable sense, the internet of the soil, and they function most actively in the cool, moist conditions of early spring. This is not magic. This is 450 million years of coevolution, operating exactly as designed in exactly the conditions it was designed for. Conditions that modern agriculture has systematically destroyed through tillage, chemical application, and the insane practice of leaving soil bare and exposed through the winter months. And that destruction was not accidental. It was engineered. The story of how we lost cold weather planting is the story of how we lost food sovereignty itself. And it begins with a single chemical reaction perfected in 1909 by Fritz Haber and scaled to industrial production by Karl Bosch. The Haber-Bosch process. The fixation of atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia. It was originally developed not to feed the world, but to produce explosives for the Imperial German war machine. The same factories that manufactured ammonium nitrate for bombs were retooled after the First World War to produce ammonium nitrate for fertilizer. And with that single pivot, the entire philosophy of agriculture changed overnight. Before Haber-Bosch, every farmer on Earth understood one fundamental truth. The soil is alive and you must feed it. Compost, manure, cover crops, crop rotation, fallowing, these were not quaint traditions. They were survival strategies honed over 10,000 years of observation. The soil was treated as a living organism because it was a living organism, a teaspoon containing more microorganisms than there are humans on the planet. After Haber-Bosch, the soil became a substrate, a holding medium, a thing to pour chemicals onto. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the so-called NPK ratio, became the holy trinity of modern agronomy, and everything else was discarded. The 40-plus trace minerals that plants need, the biological communities that make those minerals available, the fungal networks, the bacterial colonies, the protozoa that graze on bacteria and release plant-available nitrogen in their waste. All of it was deemed unnecessary because the bag of blue crystals from the chemical company could force a plant to grow without any of it. And grow it did. Grow fast, grow big, grow empty. A potato grown in synthetic fertilizer on dead soil will produce a large, uniform tuber that contains roughly 40% less mineral content than the same variety grown in biologically active soil in the 1940s. This is not conjecture. This is documented. The Furman E. Baer report, published by Rutgers University, tested mineral content in vegetables across multiple states and found variations of over 400% in calcium, magnesium, and iron depending on soil health. The USDA's own nutrient database, when compared across decades, shows a steady, undeniable decline in the nutritional density of virtually every commercially grown vegetable. You are eating more and receiving less. You are paying more and getting emptier food. And the system that produces this food has a vested interest in keeping you on the treadmill. Because a family that grows its own nutrient-dense potatoes in February does not need a grocery store in March, April, May, June, July, or August. And a family that does not need a grocery store does not need the chemical company, the seed patent holder, the shipping conglomerate, or the pharmaceutical industry that profits from the chronic diseases caused by nutrient-deficient diets. The cold weather planting window was not forgotten. It was made irrelevant. The entire infrastructure of modern food production, from the extension service pamphlets that tell you to wait until May, to the garden center calendars printed by corporations that sell warm season annuals, to the seed packets with their deliberately conservative planting instructions, all of it conspires to keep you waiting, keep you buying, keep you dependent. So let us break the chain. Let us go into the yard, the balcony, the fire escape, the abandoned lot, the strip of land behind the garage that no one has touched in 20 years, and let us plant. Here is what you need, and more importantly, here is what you must avoid. First, the variety. Do not plant russet Burbanks. Do not plant anything marketed as a baking potato. These are commercial cultivars bred for industrial conditions, and they will perform poorly in cold soil without heavy chemical input. Seek out Yukon Gold, which tolerates cold soil remarkably well and produces buttery, yellow-fleshed tubers with high carotenoid content. Seek out Red Norland, the earliest maturing red potato available, capable of producing harvestable new potatoes in as few as 60 days from planting. Seek out Kennebec if you want a storage potato that will last through winter. Seek out fingerling varieties like Russian banana or French fingerling for flavor that will make you question everything you have ever been sold in a plastic bag. And if you can find them. If you are willing to search the small seed-saving networks and the heritage catalogs that still operate outside the mainstream, seek out the old Andean cultivars. Papa Purpura, Huayro, Peruanita. These are potatoes that were bred by human hands at 12,000 feet above sea level in the Andes, in soil that freezes almost every night, and they carry genetic memory of cold that no modern hybrid can match. Second, the preparation. Take your seed potatoes and cut them into pieces, each piece containing at least 2 eyes. Let the cut surfaces dry for 48 hours in a cool, dim room until a thin, leathery skin forms over the wound. This is called suberization. The cut surface is forming a layer of suberin, a waxy, hydrophobic biopolymer that seals the wound against bacterial and fungal invasion. Do not skip this step. If you plant freshly cut potatoes into cold, wet soil, Fusarium and Erwinia bacteria will colonize the exposed starch within 72 hours, and your seed piece will dissolve into a reeking gray slime. Patience here is not optional. It is the difference between a harvest and a failure. Third, the soil. Do not use bagged potting mix from a big box store. Most commercial potting mixes are composed primarily of peat moss, which is being strip mined from ancient bogs at a rate that far exceeds natural regeneration, and perlite, which is a volcanic glass heated to over 1600 degrees Fahrenheit in an industrial kiln. These products are ecologically destructive and nutritionally inert. Instead, use the soil you already have. If it is heavy clay, amend it not with purchased products but with chopped autumn leaves that have been partially decomposed over the winter. The lignin in those leaves is being broken down by basidiomycete fungi, the white rot fungi, into humic and fulvic acids that will restructure clay particles into aggregates, improving drainage and aeration without a single dollar spent. If your soil is sandy, add compost. Your own compost. Kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, cardboard, the stems and leaves of last year's garden, all of it broken down by the invisible army of organisms that asks nothing of you except time and moisture. Fourth, the planting. Dig a trench 8 inches deep. Place your cured seed pieces 12 inches apart, cut side down, eyes facing upward. Cover them with 4 inches of soil, leaving 4 inches of trench depth remaining. This is critical. As the shoots emerge and reach 6 to 8 inches tall, you will mound additional soil, straw, or decomposed leaf matter around the stems, burying all but the top 2 inches of green growth. This forces the plant to produce additional stolons, horizontal underground stems, from the buried nodes, and each stolon is a potential tuber. A single seed piece, properly hilled 3 or 4 times throughout the growing season, can produce 6 to 12 tubers. 1 potato becomes 12. 12 become 144. The mathematics of abundance are staggering, and they require nothing but soil, water, sunlight, and the willingness to bend your back and work. Fifth, and this is the warning that separates the successful from the heartbroken, never, under any circumstances, plant potatoes in soil where tomatoes, peppers, spinach or eggplants grew within the previous 3 years. All of these plants belong to the Solanaceae family, the nightshades, and they share a common set of devastating soil-borne pathogens: verticillium wilt, early blight caused by Alternaria solani, late blight caused by Phytophthora infestans, the very same organism that caused the Irish famine. These pathogens persist in the soil as resistant structures, microsclerotia, oospores, chlamydospores, that can survive for years, waiting for a suitable host. Rotation is not a suggestion, it is a law of biology. Break it, and you will learn the lesson that Ireland learned in 1845, written in the language of blackened leaves and rotting tubers. Never use treated lumber to build raised beds for potatoes. Chromated copper arsenate, and the preservative used in pressure-treated wood for decades, leaches arsenic and chromium into the soil. Even the newer alkaline copper quaternary treatments release copper at levels that are toxic to the very mycorrhizal fungi your potatoes depend on. Use untreated pine, cedar, or hemlock. Let it rot after a few years. It is supposed to rot. That rot is not decay. It is transformation. It is carbon returning to the soil food web, feeding the organisms that feed your plants that feed you. The cycle is perfect. It was always perfect. We are the ones who broke it. There is a woman in Detroit on a street where half the houses are abandoned and the lots have gone wild with ailanthus and goldenrod, who planted 40 pounds of seed potatoes in February of 2019. She used the trench method. She used leaves she raked from the gutters of empty houses. She used compost she had been building in a salvaged bathtub behind her kitchen for 3 years. She did not buy a single bag of fertilizer. She did not buy a single bottle of pesticide. By June, she harvested over 360 pounds of potatoes from a plot no larger than a 2-car garage. She stored them in a root cellar she dug herself beneath her basement stairs, in sand she hauled from a riverbank at a constant temperature of 40 degrees. Those potatoes fed her family of 5 through the following winter. The grocery bill for those months dropped by over 70%. She did the math on a scrap of paper and taped it to her refrigerator. The paper read, 360 pounds, $0. On freedom. There is a retired schoolteacher in rural Vermont who was told by his doctor that his type 2 diabetes was irreversible and that he would need metformin for the rest of his life. He stopped buying potatoes from the store. He started growing his own, cold-planted in February, harvested in stages from June through October, using no chemicals of any kind. He ate them with the skins on, boiled and cooled overnight, a process that converts a portion of the starch into resistant starch, a prebiotic fiber that feeds bifidobacterium and lactobacillus colonies in the large intestine, improves insulin sensitivity, and lowers postprandial blood glucose response by up to 33%. Within 18 months, his fasting blood sugar had dropped from 240 to 104. His doctor asked what medication he was taking. He said, potatoes. The doctor did not write it down. These stories are not anomalies. They are echoes. They are the faint reverberations of a knowledge system that sustained humanity for 8 millennia before we decided that convenience was more important than competence, before we traded the shovel for the shopping cart and called it progress. There is a particular quality to the light in late February. It is thin. It is pale. It arrives at an angle so low that it barely clears the tree line, casting long shadows across ground that still holds the memory of January's deepest cold. It is a light that most people associate with waiting, with endurance, with the dull resignation of a season that has not yet ended. But if you understand what that light actually means, if you understand the photoperiod signals it sends to dormant buds and sleeping soil organisms, then you know that it is not a light of waiting. It is a light of beginning. The soil beneath your feet right now, this very moment, is not dead. It is not resting. It is teeming with a war for resources so vast and so intricate that no human technology has ever successfully replicated it. Bacteria are consuming the last of autumn's organic residues and excreting the nutrients that will fuel spring's first growth. Fungal hyphae are extending through micropores in the soil matrix, bridging the gap between mineral particles and root zones that do not yet exist. Protozoa are engulfing bacteria by the billions and releasing ammonium in quantities precisely calibrated to what the emerging root tips will need in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. The system is not waiting for you. It is preparing, and it has been preparing since the first frost of November. The question is whether you will meet it, whether you will kneel in the cold dirt before anyone else on your street has even thought about gardening and push a wrinkled, cut piece of potato into the earth with your bare hands, whether you will trust the frost instead of fearing it, whether you will believe the soil instead of the seed packet, whether you will choose the labor of growing over the convenience of buying, even when the convenience is easier, even when the labor is cold and unglamorous and no one is watching. Because this is not really about potatoes. You already know that. This is about what it means to feed yourself in a world that profits from your inability to do so. Every potato you pull from your own ground is a small act of defiance. Every meal you cook from your own harvest is a vote cast against a system that wants you dependent, nutrient-depleted, and afraid. Every seed piece you press into the February soil is a declaration, quiet, private, invisible to everyone but you and the earth, that you refuse to participate in a food system that treats soil as a dead medium, food as a commodity, and human health as a market to be exploited. The Quechua people of the Andes, the ones who domesticated the potato 8,000 years ago in the frozen highlands above Lake Titicaca, had a word for the act of planting. They did not separate it from the act of praying. The planting was the prayer. The labor was the devotion. The harvest was not a transaction. It was an answer. March the 1st is coming. The ground is waiting, the tuber